following is a guide on the Act 1 bosses of Dragon Quest XI as the Definitive Edition. AI behaviors in the original version of the game slightly differ. Furthermore, I will limit myself to the enemy behavior using the Stronger Enemies Draconian quest. I will also try to leave out the non-specific broken strategies. For example, Yggdrasil leaves or Pep Pops are super strong, but I don't need to tell you that every boss gets more reliable if you have them on everyone. Your ways of doing damage are similarly one-dimensional. You can buff your attack and then use the strongest physical attacks you have available to you against every boss. Sometimes you have a better alternative, and sometimes Zap, for example, is not that good, so you can't reduce the defense. But I'm trying to not be here all day, and I will eventually cover all of these strong, universally applicable options in a character guide, so I'm only going to mention those best options when they change or are boss specific. My goal here is to make the guide so general that you can apply it for any challenge one you can come up with. Whether you're trying to go for a low level or using a specific combination of Draconian quests, maybe even both. Maybe you even come up with your own restrictions, like using only specific party members. I want this to be useful for as many playthroughs as possible, specifically when fighting against a super strong enemy AI. And the final thing I'd like to point out before we can start is that the resistance data for basically all enemies in the game is in the description. I will mention the important ones, but if you're interested you can always take a look. So first of all, I am not covering the Smog because it's too simple. The only remotely interesting thing to note is that you can use skill seeds to get Flame Slash early. The slimes are technically an even earlier forced encounter that can roadblock a couple of playthroughs if you're heavily modding the game, for example. But I don't want to sit here discussing slime strategies, so I will start with the first slightly tricky opponent. Although that's only relatively speaking, because the Tricky Devil, despite his name, does not have many tricks up his sleeves. His initial AI is very simple. He will start by using this on the first turn, then he will attack 4 times in a row. When he gets low, he inserts the heal after the first attack. So the full cycle becomes this, attack, then heal, and then 3 attacks before he repeats all of it. Consumables are a huge difference maker in this fight. If you either have shopping enabled or if you're willing to farm medicinal herbs, those are really strong, they just out heal his damage. And as long as you use 2 herbs when he uses this and then 1 for each of his attacks, you will end up outlasting him. Throwing herbs doesn't cost MP, so it's sustainable and you can buy them really cheap. He also happens to have a slight sleep resistance, but doesn't get many chances to wake up as he only acts once per turn. Sleeping Hibiscus is really good against him. When he's asleep you should obviously heal and try to not wake him up immediately, so use Sis or Frizz for damage instead of physical attacks. Unless of course you want to wake him up intentionally to put him back to sleep right away. In case it wasn't obvious, the sequence in which he uses his ability stays the same even while he's asleep. So he will basically pause until he gets to act again, and then he will pick up right where he left off. At base he only has 9 MP, which means that he will run out eventually. Once he does, he will stop using spells and will resort to only physical attacks. While he does get easier afterwards, I don't recommend stalling for all that long. If you have the resources to survive for that long, you also have the resources to just kill him in the same time. You don't have a way to actually drain MP, so especially on harder enemies where he has even more, it takes a while. Given how he only uses a heal every 6 turns, it's relatively okay to outdamage him. One difficulty you might be facing is that he is around your agility, so he can randomly go first or last on a turn. Him taking 2 actions in a row is often an option, but it's pretty hard to play around because you only have 2 characters at this point. For damage, Flame Slash is the best option for both party members. If you go and grind as high as the reduced XP from weaker enemies quest allows, which means to level 10, you will get the Rubble Rouser ability, which he's weak to. The Scorched Earth Pep Power especially just beats the fight by itself, but level 10 is unreasonably high. This just goes to show that all Draconian quests is still way easier than a regular playthrough without any of the quests if you grind as much as you are able to. A more reasonable pet power to have at this point of the game is the Real Decoy. It can really help you not give him a chance to heal when you're going for that last spurt of damage. The boss also does so much damage to you that at lower levels you will automatically get pepped the first time you get hit by one of his physical attacks. Overall, it's not too hard to get 2 real decoys in a single fight against him. The next boss you encounter are the Grim Griffins. They appear to act entirely randomly, so you just hope for the Accelerator, because you're probably not outspeeding them anyways. When they use it, it's just a wasted action. This is a really RNG fight. It's entirely possible that you start the fight and on turn 1 they gang up on one of your party members and kill them. And because you can't outspeed them in a lot of playthroughs, there's just nothing you can do. The approach should be to try to get one of them out of the fight as soon as possible. If only one of them is attacking, you can easily out-heal them. So for this reason, Sleeping Hibiscus is really strong to take one of them out of the equation for a little while. For the same reason, I don't recommend AoE options, even though they seem really appealing. It doesn't matter whether the one that's left over by itself has a lot of HP left or not, because it's so trivial to fight a single griffin. Regardless, Zap is a decent damage option as well as Flame Slash. If you reach level 10 by now, Scorched Earth is very strong, but the difference to the Real Decoy is not huge, because again, you just want to kill one of them and then the fight is over. Jarvis by himself has a very simple pattern. He attacks on the first turn, then on the second it's a coin flip to either use Deep Breath or physical attack, and on the third he will use Chilly Breath. If you know that he used Deep Breath the turn before, you know that you are gonna have to block because it's gonna do double damage. He repeats the same thing again and again, so you know that every third turn is gonna be dangerous. Serena by herself probably out-heals him, but the difficulty comes from the first few turns and the shadows. I highly recommend using Scorched Earth and either Sis or Zap against the shadows. At higher levels you might even have Power Throw or Bang available to you. Regardless, the point stands and there's not many alternatives to just killing the shadows quickly. You can technically put Jarvis to sleep, but he's 50% resistant to Sleeping Hibiscus. That, coupled with Veronica and Serena being able to wake him up whenever they decide to attack him, means that I don't recommend going for it at all. If you need RNG to pass this fight, it's gonna be the chance for the shadows to attack Serena or Veronica instead of one of your active party members. Against Jarvis himself, Dragon Slash does the best damage and Cutting Edge is a close second for the Luminary. I do want to take this opportunity to talk about the AI controlled, I guess I'll call them helpers. So sometimes you have an extra party member or two around that you can't control, but they're invincible. Some of them act differently, but most of them are able to heal you. For example, Gemma at the very start, Serena right now, Vince at the MMA fights, Rap against Awaktagon, and 8 against Tyrant. So the first time a party member falls to around half HP, they will heal them guaranteed, but afterwards a second heal in a row isn't guaranteed anymore. If you then heal up and fall below half HP again after the last action the helper did was not a heal, they will again heal you guaranteed. This sometimes acts a bit strange when MP healing is also involved because the priorities are apparently random. But that's the gist of it. When you're below half HP for the first time, you can always count on the heal, as long as you're not running out of MP, and at least if it's not Rap, who is a bit of a mess given his old age and that he has to also juggle status effects and dead party members that need reviving. And with this quick tutorial we have finally made it out the tutorial section. From this point on you can freely reallocate your skills to suit each battle that you're stuck on. The first what I would consider real boss in this game is the Slayer of the Sands. He gets 2 actions per turn, 1 normal attack and 1 stronger move. This stronger move can be anything between a Kazap, which is pretty good, a Confusion, which is kinda bad, and something like a Desperate Attack or the multi-hit attack, which are absolutely devastating. Therefore he is again pretty RNG dependent, especially because Sylvando over here isn't guaranteed to snap you out of confusion, and also because the Slayer of the Sands sometimes just decides to attack Sylvando instead of you and wastes his action. He resists it, but Dazzle is worthwhile here. With Dazzle applied to him, his only source of damage is the Walk Throw, unless of course he just decides to hit. There's also an AI anomaly where he later on sometimes ditches the normal attack for other damaging moves, and I have no idea what causes it. At the very least for the first 5 or so turns he will always have that one regular attack. This is the point in the game where great swords start taking off and cutting edge will outdamage everything else from the Luminary. For Veronica the best damage option is Sis, especially because the Slayer of the Sands won't parry it. Eric's best damage option, if you can even call it that, is getting up poison with Cobra Strike despite the Slayer being resistant. If you do get the poison, it does a good chunk until it wears off. Besides that, I recommend just using items to heal with Eric. Maybe if he occasionally outspeeds, even going for a cheeky Sleeping Hibiscus. For the most part, sleep isn't worth it against the Slayer of the Sands because Sylvando will wake him right back up. Sometimes your accuracy gets lowered, but even then I don't recommend using D-Dazzle with Veronica. The only exception would be if you already have Zap applied to the boss and the Luminary is up next. Then it might make sense to D-Dazzle him to get a stronger hit in, but the spells are so close to the same amount of damage that for the most part you can wait out those couple of turns. Especially Eric doesn't do damage either way. Using Zap is always gonna be worth it because at the very least Sylvando is going to do way more damage with it. And while reducing his defense is pretty useful, buffing your own is not that great. Even if you're using armor and despite the abundance of regular attacks he does, the critical hits still ignore defense and that's what kills you. In many cases you can't afford to use buff because you need to heal to stay at max HP in case he decides to use a desperate attack the next turn. Buff is still good, don't get me wrong. But if you want to play it safe against this guy, you need to stay at max HP in most cases, regardless of whether you have buff active or not. On the same note, the only pep I recommend for this fight is Tundra and Lightning, because it does almost half his HP in a single action. Tundra and Lightning, by the way, also just kills the Colossus by itself. I won't mention them because of that reason. The other reason is that they are very easy. Next up we have our first encounter with Jasper, and it's a very interesting one. He alternates between 1 and 2 actions, and when left uninterrupted he will use Zam on those single actions. His complete pattern is Sword Stance and an attack, then Zam, then attack and fizzle, and then another Zam. This is what he repeats. This means he has almost full uptime on his parry chance. An anomaly with him is that he has 80 MP, which is a lot for this point of the game, even if you're trying to drain it with the sisters. But if he does run out, he will stop acting entirely. So even though his physical attacks are pretty strong, this is a win option. Therefore, this is one of the few fights where you can actually play defensively. And while we're on defense, armor makes this fight way easier. If you look at his pattern, you can see that he only uses 1 damaging action per turn. As long as you out-heal that one attack, whether it's Zam or regular attack, you just win, there's no two ways about it. So for damage, Sylvando with Cobra Strike into Victimizer can carry this fight if you need him to. He can also use Hustle Dance, but that's useless if the sisters are getting one shot. If they aren't getting killed in one hit, then Hustle Dance is also gonna trivialize this fight. Jasper is immune to basically all status effects besides poison. And I guess if you want to call it a status effect, Zap, because he's only slightly resistant to it. Either way, I recommend ignoring that he has a parry chance and just going for full physical damage. If the sisters are getting one shot, this fight really becomes a damage race. Or of course, a very slow Turtle Fest where the sisters are constantly defending. It's not like Veronica, for example, is very valuable for this fight. Besides the first Zap, I guess Sizzle can be useful if she's at level 21. or of course if you're going for the cheesy MP drain strategy, that works. What I'm saying is that it's totally viable to have them back of the party, just healing whoever gets attacked with the first physical attack, and then you just let them die as soon as Jasper decides that it's time for them. This strategy is best coupled with the Fight Fantastic to damage raise Jasper into the ground before he kills you, and if it puts you into the also important getting 2-shot territory, then Care Prayer would be absolutely essential. Oh, also in case you're worried about Fizzle, just put medicinal herbs on the sisters and they're gonna do just as much as they were doing before. Next we have the arena fights and they're all very similar. I do recommend greatswords either way, but if you can get the platinum power sword, it's especially going to make this a cakewalk. If you're playing with armor, then you can still swap to shields periodically when you're not attacking. Though, given how easy the retries on these fights are, it's viable to just spam cutting edge on one of the 2 enemies until you get lucky and kill them. These fights can either be the hardest roadblocks so far or brain dead easy, it really just depends on what kind of playthrough you're on. But getting to the technical side, all of the following enemies reduce a scripted pep power on turn 5 or turn 6. If you're delaying it with sleep, they will activate it as soon as the asleep enemy wakes up and on the asleep one's action, even if the other one is supposed to initiate the pep. So if for example Web peps up in the last fight, you need to either kill him or Jade, put one of them to sleep, though that's risky, or defend. That is because if left uninterrupted, Jade will probably go first on the next turn given her high agility, get her action and use the pep power to probably kill you. Defending is definitely the best option in most cases. And again, every fight is structured like this. If you see one enemy pep up, or if you know it's the turn where they're getting pepped up because it's always the same, you need to either defend or be able to take care of one of the enemies. The first fight is the Underdigger and the Snowman. If you're at a lower level, the Underdigger is extremely dangerous because you can one-shot you with crits even if you play with armor. It's way easier to take measures against the Snowman. I do recommend getting either Helicopter or Frostfang to deal with the clones. Alternatively, if you have enough damage, you can outright kill the Snowman and the clones will vanish. I recommend killing the Snowman first, then make sure to always be full HP while fighting the Underdigger. If you can't win with brute force, at least not reliably, you can always resort to Greatsword Guard. It doesn't make for a really reliable strat, but it at least gives you a win option because you can parry all the attacks in this fight, theoretically. And in case you're doing some sort of challenge run where you need even more RNG to win, Sleeping Hibiscus or Sleuth is a viable option because they are both only very slightly resistant to sleep. All the other fighters are going to be more resistant. While it is effective, I do advise against using consumables when you're trying to get past these fights. You don't get them back when you go back to the arena's lobby, unlike when you die against any other fight and reload a save. Even if a strategy is less reliable, you can try it more often if you don't have to worry about restarting to get your consumables back. Next up, Ramblin and Cinderella. Cinderella's damage varies greatly and Ramblin can just decide to hit Vince instead of you. If you're stuck, you can get pretty far with RNG. There's a chance you might need to run Cinderella out of MP if your damage isn't good enough. In that case, it barely matters whether you attack Ramblin or Cinderella first. Cinderella without MP is easier to deal with, but she also takes more damage than Ramblin in the first place. And just like with the Grim Griffins, if it's down to a 2v1, you're going to win either way. On the other hand, if you have enough damage to kill Cinderella without resorting to running her out of MP, then she should take priority. When choosing your armor, you shouldn't really look at the fire resistance here. You don't get a high resistance on any of the good armor and you end up taking much more damage from Ramblina's physical attacks, so high defense armor still does more for you. Greatsword Guard can parry Whistle here but not Sizzle and Ziz, so it's kinda viable. But if you don't need to run Cinderella out of MP, which is only in the hardest of challenge ones, I don't recommend it. Just attacking Cinderella one more time is worth way too much. For Sylvando and the Golden Boy, the major threat is Sylvando buffing up and killing you with Miracle Slash. It can be worth going for Sleeping Hibiscus on Sylvando, even though he's 50% resistant, at least when you're stuck. Outside of that, I recommend killing Golden Boy first, because he does a steady bit of damage, then play it super safe against Sylvando. As long as you block to survive his buff duration, you'll be fine for a bit. He also doesn't heal outside of Miracle Slash, so Vince will eventually do him in. So finally we have Web and Jade, and they're the easiest fight here. They will often waste their turns assessing the situation. Web even is so nice, he has a chance to target Vince with Zam instead of you. There's a very specific later boss that does not have a chance to target your AI controlled helper with his Zam type spell. We'll get to him eventually. Either way, Web is really nice to you. I do recommend also hitting him first, that is because Jade has a chance to dodge your attacks. If your damage is low, you might need to run Web out of MP. In that case, I do recommend trying to get as many mid heals out as possible. When he's busy healing, he won't be attacking you, so surviving gets easier, but it also eats up a lot of MP. Again though, I really don't recommend doing this unless you need to. Speaking of which, I don't recommend Greatsword Guard for this fight. Most of the stuff Web throws at you, like Zam, can't be parried. But at the end of the day, this is so much easier than all the other fights you've just gotten past, so it doesn't really matter. Aratagon is probably the hardest boss so far. He gets 2 actions per turn and he seems to be entirely random. At least there's a chance for him to either do 2 regular attacks on turn 1 if he's generous, or he can also use an AoE and confuse everybody on your team. This is especially bad since he's so fast that nobody reliably outspeeds him. Though at higher levels with equipment that boosts agility like Mercury Bananas, you can get pretty close. This means that pep powers are all going to be very hard to get off. Given how it takes over a minute to walk all the way there and he can just end you on turn 1, he's probably the most frustrating boss in this game besides Tyrant. Especially given how you don't have many tools to deal with him. For example, you only get 1 Star of Clarity and it's only a 25% chance resistance to confusion. It is still nice to have this, especially on Sylvando. His resistance should be a priority, but especially given how confusion is one of the most annoying status effects, because you can't swap out confused party members, unlike asleep or paralyzed ones. It's simply not good enough to where any approach that isn't hyper aggressive can reliably kill this boss. So let's talk about the best ways to put him out of his misery. First, he's immune to most status effects. The only thing worth going for is Zap and to a much lesser extent Poison. He also resists Zap type damage. Tundrand Lightning is still strong, partially because the Wachtagon is weak to Earth, but Fight Fantastic might outperform it. Eric has a choice here between swords with Falcon Slash and boomerangs with Toomerang, and especially with a platinum sword, swords win out here by a bit. Sadly, Serena here doesn't do much damage even with the lightning lance given how he resists Zap, and Veronica can do kind of decent damage with Sizzle, but she's mostly on Zap duty. Sylvando should get Sobering Slap and Hustle Dance. He's definitely a key party member here, and I recommend having him on heal duty all the time while everybody else focuses on doing as much damage as possible. For that reason, you should try to keep Serena out of your active lineup. If you want a reliable clear, then Pep Pops are worth thinking about now. This is probably the best time to use them in Act 1, at least if nobody's stunned and you know you can get one off. Getting an extra Tundrand Lightning and shortening the battle by 2 or 3 turns is massive. For Tentacular, you need to get the obvious out of the way first. You can talk to this old lady here and she will give you about a cannon that will lower the boss's HP and make him start confused with reduced stats. He's still not terribly hard without the cannon, but unless you want to challenge yourself, the cannon will just make him significantly faster and easier. He alternates between 1 and 2 actions while the tentacles get 1 action per turn. He's slightly weak to Zap and Fire and he will resummon the tentacles if you kill them, although he takes a long time until he does. It seems like it's a set action, but counting for it isn't feasible because actions that get taken away by status effects don't count. I recommend focusing on the main body, maybe killing 1 tentacle, then using status effects on the main body when a tentacle protects it. Jade is gonna carry your damage here, especially if you got a lightning lance from the casino, but even without. But the main thing really is status effects, they are really good against him. Dazzle kinda works, same with Fuddle, but Sleep is what really breaks this fight. When he gets affected by a status effect, it will also affect the tentacles. They will not take turns away from the duration of the status effect however. This means a single snooze will often take away 3 of his action as well as 4 from the tentacles. It helps that the tentacles don't block non-damaging moves like status effects or debuffs. And if you hit him with confusion or sleep, then the tentacles will stop guarding him. You can also hit the tentacles with Cursor Cut after putting the main body to sleep or while it's confused at the start. But Sylvando has better options like Hustle Dance and maybe even Gold Rush if he's at level 25. And Eric honestly does more damage with Cobra Strike or even his Earth Sigils. When you're keeping the boss asleep, you can use Sizzle or Zam instead of attacking physically. Giga Slash from the Luminary or Gold Rush from Sylvando won't wake him up either. You can also attack the tentacles without the risk of waking him up. It might seem tempting to run him out of MP given how he has very little and isn't resistant to drain magic, but he doesn't use MP for any of his abilities. So even at 0 MP he functions normally. Physical damage is the main threat here, so even though you can get decent ice resistant armor from the Snifflime area, which technically resists the ice breath, you should just get your defense as high as possible. Boosting your agility to more reliably outspeed him can also be useful, if you want to for example wake him up with multi-thrust and put him back to sleep before he can get an action in. Slowing down Jade to reliably go after him sadly isn't feasible. In my opinion, this is the last time Tundra and Lightning really shines. It does good damage and also clears the tentacles, but it already doesn't outperform the Fight Fantastic or Brownie boost. Caprayer is also alright if you have good armor. In the definitive edition, Doa in Grey was nerfed into the ground. Now she only takes 2 actions per turn. These appear to be entirely random and they vary between pretty weak physical attacks, stealing one of your party members' abilities, which is an absolute joke, and all the other way worse attacks. Just to play around the ability ceiling, I recommend putting herbs for healing on everyone, so that for example Jade has something to do if her abilities get locked away. Poison is pretty good and no other status effects are worth going for. She resists basically every element, so the lightning lance might do less damage than a trident. Either way, you need to play aggressively here and thankfully her HP is pretty low. Even with armor, I don't recommend buff or buff because both her laser and her flick ignore it and those are the most dangerous abilities. I also recommend putting everyone who acts after her in the 3rd or 4th slot of the active party. This will make them less likely to get flicked and therefore less likely to lose you in action. If Jade is carrying your damage, she might be an exception to this rule, but only if you don't have a leveled Luminary for example or a level 25 Sylvando with Gold Rush. In other words, someone else to carry your damage, because in that case you would put Jade in the back of your party because she's your number 1 priority to keep alive. Her base defense is quite high, so lowering it should be a priority even if she slightly resists it. Sobering Slap is kinda useful if you don't have Gold Rush. With Gold Rush, Sylvando should just focus on doing damage. If you already have a lot of dead party members, it's also viable to swap out everybody except for the beguiled party member and just let her wipe out your party. There's a good chance she will recover some HP, but resetting the turn and not having to deal with one of your own party members attacking you is a huge help. Equipment like the safety goggles you can buy in the academy or Gamma's charm to reduce the chance for beguilement are important here, and boosting your agility to outspeed her is viable too, mainly because you won't be losing an action when she decides to flick you to death. The best pet powers for this fight are Brownie Boost and the Fight Fantastic for physical damage, because if you aren't playing with Yggdrasil Leaves, you basically lose a party member each time she decides to flick someone, so you need to kill her before she decides to do it too often. The Elysium Bird is barely even a boss at all, but I do think he's in some cases more dangerous than Doa, Grey or Tentacular, so I will still cover him here. The combined HP of him and the ads isn't even that much lower than the other 2 bosses we just talked about. He has quite a long pattern, I'll put it at the bottom of the screen, and I am sure there's some rhyme or reason to the multi-heals. He seems to do them after the first grab and then the pattern goes on like usual, but it might be more complex than this, but I am not going to go far for figuring out this boss, if we even consider him a boss, but we'll get to that. This guy does really high damage, so you need to kill the ads as fast as possible. He also outspeeds you and can just kill one party member on turn 1 if the ads team up with him. In a lot of playthroughs he also just one-shots his sisters with his grab attack. Luckily he's an absolute glass cannon and will die quickly. He does use multi-heal and the ads will heal him with mid-heal. He will even heal if he's by himself, but he doesn't heal that much and it's probably the weakest thing he has. As you might expect, you have to kill the ads quickly, but they are so fragile that they almost get 1 KO'd by everything. Something like Unbridled Blade might even kill them in one hit if you're high level enough. You can also use Whack on them and the chance is okay. And on that note, the resistance data that's often listed online for the main boss is incorrect. He is immune to Whack and a lot more resistant to a lot of status effects. The easiest way to get rid of the ads is Gold Rush if your Sylvander is level 25 because it just one-shots them, but if you don't have it, then a pep power to get rid of the ads might be worth thinking about. Fire and Brimstone works, but it's not the only option. Roaring Tirade is useful in this battle, but you probably won't have the pep on the Luminary left over. If you do use status effects like Roaring Tirade on turn 1, then you have a bit of time and Giga Slash and Boom can also take care of the ads. The ads have a slight resistance to all status effects, but that also means that almost everything works against them except Puff Puff and Foot Sweep. The boss himself can be put to sleep, confused and paralyzed, but he's resistant to all. It does mean you can train status effects to prevent him from acting for unreasonably long, but only if you're lucky. Dazzle works on him and is very effective if you get it off, but the chance is too low for me to recommend it. And finally we have another boss with limited MP. But even if he runs out, he will just use regular attacks which are arguably more deadly instead, so don't try to drain his MP. And on the same note, don't try to use Fizzle either. For the same reason, the armor you wear should focus on physical defense. Sizzle really is the least of your concerns here, even if it crits. Besides a pepped up Jade, nobody will outspeed him either, so boosting your agility doesn't help much. So now I want to mention that all of that which I just mentioned does not matter. You can skip this boss. And it's not even extremely glitchy. So if you go to 2D mode after beating Crystallinda, the game will automatically give you all the orbs because it assumes Crystallinda was the final boss of Act 1. You only beat this guy for an orb. This means that you won't have to fight him at all. The game doesn't consider him important enough to give him his own scenario. Yermon's pattern is pretty simple. He attacks or snowballs or kicks twice in a row and then he will use his Jolly Jig. You can be sure that he won't kill you on his third action, so you can risk using Sleeping Hibiscus or Snooze at low HP. The upside to Sleeping Hibiscus is that the odds are better. He's supposed to be a hard level check, but he can also be turned into gambling with Sleep and Greatsword Guard. Sleeping Hibiscus to then heal and reapply Greatsword Guard is pretty important, and as explained, it's relatively risk free. If you spam enough sleep, you can even wait out the buff duration, so the kicking won't kill you in one hit. Technically, Yermon is weak to Zap, meaning Giga Slash does fine, because it doesn't wake him up and it allows for shields, it's even better, but Cutting Edge or even Unbridled Blade is definitely the better damage option here. Greatsword Guard can parry all the attacks, and if you have the counter unlocked, you can counter the kick and the regular attack, so you will get even more extra damage. If you manage to put him to sleep and already healed and get your Greatsword Guard up but don't want to wake him up yet, you can use Whistle or Sizzle and they do a decent amount of damage because of Yermon's fire weakness. As for your equipment, you do want to either reliably go after or before him, so you might want to adjust accordingly. Besides that, I just recommend going for high physical defense. Snowballs barely hurt and they're the least of your worries. You don't have many options here and it's a pretty RNG fight with the parries and sleeps and even sleep duration. Honestly, the solo Luminary fights are the worst part of this game. This is not as bad as the MMA fights, but still pretty bad. I wonder whether there's gonna be another one. If there was, there's no way it could be worse than what has come before, right? As has been a trend, Crystallinda does 2 actions per turn which appear to be entirely random. Even her summoning the snowstorm seems to be up to chance. She reduces accuracy with the snowstorm and it's almost always gonna be up. That being said, the reduction isn't big enough to make something like Hawkeye Claw or Giga Slash worthwhile. Multi-Thrust and Unbridled Blade are still the best damage options for their respective characters. Poison is kinda decent against her if you let it run out. It does about the same damage as a single Gold Rush if the poison sticks and you let it run all the way. It needs to first hit and apply poison though. And as has also been a trend, Gold Rush, if you're at level 25, which you very likely are by now, Not only does massive damage without costing MP, but it also has a 100% accuracy. If you can get it by now, go get it. And no status effects are worth using on her. Fizzle theoretically works, but it basically does nothing and she's very resistant to it. So despite her being a witch, sealing her magic isn't good. The others she's just plain immune to, except Poison, which as I mentioned before is alright. She might be the hardest boss in Act 1, mostly because she does pretty high damage. She's quite a bit random, so retrying her and getting less ice breaths might just be the difference maker. Her AoE'd ice damage is definitely the most dangerous part, because either Crackle or the ice breath with her basic attack will usually kill a party member. There's basically two approaches. One is spamming Hustle Dance and the other one is spamming Gold Rush. So it's either defensive and trying to survive while whittling her down, or you just throw everything you have, including all your cash, against the wall and hope that she dies before you do, while healing with the other 3 party members. Surprisingly, the second option is usually better because Gold Rush is just that strong. She resists that too, so using Gold Rush means you won't have to lower her defense and won't have to worry about the accuracy debuff. Of course, you can still throw in other attacks when you can, maybe even poison, but I really do recommend Gold Rush every turn if your level is around 25. Below, you'll need to rely on Multi-Thrust. This is also one of the few fights where Veronica's damage is more or less alright. For equipment, you should really get some ice resistance, and don't worry about turn skip resistance. If anything, you should hope that she tries to turn you into a snowman as often as possible. I don't know why they gave her such a weak move. It's a chance to take one action away from one of your 4 party members, but she herself only has 2 actions per turn. It's not quite as bad as sealing abilities, but that at least forced you to play around it. Really, you shouldn't be scared of her turning you into a snowman. Boosting your agility can be worth thinking about, given she only has about the same agility as Dora and Gray. And no, the Ice Hymn is not worth using to further reduce her ice damage. It's a nice idea, but the damage reduction is too low to matter. With armor, even Kabuff does more for you, despite her being the Ice Witch. Without, you can use Alma Mater or more likely just heal. The best peps against Crystallinda are probably still the attack buffs. They definitely get better with higher levels on the Luminary and Jade though. Fire and Brimstone is also fine, but starts to fall off at this point of the game. This is also a fight that Saint Song does exceptionally well in. I think starting with that ability enabled is more important than starting Pepped. There's even an argument to be made for double Saint Song, but that's mostly because the other Pep powers aren't that great in this fight. And that is all the Act 1 bosses. The only real roadblock after the Slayer of the Sands are the Luminary only fights. Masked Martial Arts are kinda tough, and so is Yermon, and those are probably the fights you'll need to grind for. Crystallinda and Awachtagon are the only regular bosses that are really difficult, but especially when you get comfortable with lineup changes mid-combat, even they aren't that hard when compared to the Arena and Yermon. Now let's just hope there's not gonna be another roadblock similar to those in Act 2. But nobody likes being limited to just the Luminary, so surely there's not gonna be anything, right? Stuff like that only happens in movies.